Well, let's get back into some finance talk this morning as we welcome Gavin Martin, the Managing Director and Financial Advisor at Cornerstone Wealth, back to talk on an issue of superannuation versus term deposits. Gavin Martin, welcome back to 2020.
G'day, Neil. Great to be with you again.
Gavin, let's talk about superannuation and term deposits, because in an earlier conversation, it's dating back perhaps a month or two, when we were talking about superannuation returns, and we were talking about returns that were, hovering around zero. In other words, our money not necessarily doing particularly well invested in superannuation, but there are some other options for us, and one of those is actually moving money into a term deposit.
Yeah, exactly. Some of us are, throwing our hands up in the air and saying, look, I've just earned, as you say, nothing in this year. I've earned 0 or maybe 1% or 2% or possibly even negative, depending on what your fund has returned. I would be better off pulling all my money out of the superannuation and putting into the bank just in a term deposit. I might earn 4.5% or 5.5% in doing so, and that would be a lot better than my 0 or potentially 1%. And that is something that is a possibility for people who have access to their superannuation money. So they've reached their preservation age and satisfied a condition of release, and they could actually pull their money out of their superannuation and put it into a bank term deposit. But it's not always the best thing to do, and there are a number of issues that people should ask, or questions that they should ask before they go ahead and do that.
Hey, we'll get to some of those issues, but when you have a self-managed superannuation, it's a little easier, isn't it, to do that sort of thing? If you've got a superannuation organisation that runs your particular superannuation fund, then sometimes it's a little bit harder to actually manoeuvre that money around.
Yes, exactly. So if you've got your own self-managed superannuation fund, you've got full control over that, and you can actually, within that fund, choose to invest your superannuation money in a term deposit. So you can say, I've got $50,000 in my self-managed super fund, and you can go to the local bank and say, I want to invest this $50,000 in a term deposit in the name of my super fund. And that's how it can actually work. Now, you used to not be able to do that if you were in a public offer fund. So this is a fund that's open to a range of people, that probably what the majority of people have their money in. And in the past, you weren't able to actually invest in term deposits, but increasingly there are organisations that are allowing people to invest in term deposits, but through their superannuation fund. So rather than having to withdraw the money from your super fund, take it out of the tax concessional environment of super, they're enabling you to leave the money in the super environment and invest it in term deposits. And it's kind of a good mix of, rather than pulling the money out, people are able to achieve the risk and the returns that are offered by term deposits without having to pull their money out of superannuation.
So when you receive your annual statement and it's showing that you've got a 0 return or even negative return, this is a time to contact your superannuation representative and talk to them about options, about how you might be able to change the way your money is being invested.
Yes, exactly. And whether it's the right thing for you to change or not depends on how old you are, how long you've got to invest, how long it is until you can access your superannuation money. All those factors should be considered before you make a change. But if you were wanting to move to a term deposit-like investment, then the options are available to you. One thing that people often confuse about that type of investment, though, is that funds often have what they call a fixed interest option. And so people think that when they invest in the fixed interest option, they're actually locking their money in for a 6-month period or a 12-month period, and they won't be able to touch their money for that period. That's what the term deposit is like. You're actually locking your money in for a 6-month term. But when you're investing in a fixed interest option within your super fund, generally that means you're grouping your money together with others, and a manager, a fund manager, is investing that money in a range of fixed interest investments. The difference between the two is that when you're investing through the fund manager in a range of investments with other people, you're able to sell out of that investment. You're able to pull out of it at any point in time, whereas with the fixed interest investment, you need to really wait until the end of the term before you can draw on the money. It's a key difference that people really need to understand.
Gavin, I'm interested in your perspectives on the idea of set and forget, which is really what we do, I guess, when we have our funds in with as you say, a superannuation fund, a public offer superannuation fund, whereas the alternative might be to have the self-managed fund where you've got to be very attentive to what's happening with your money, perhaps on a day-to-day, month-by-month basis. What's best, set and forget or having that engagement?
Yeah, very good question. Definitely having the engagement is key, and the government is introducing a new initiative that I think might have just gone through past the legislative process, and it's called My Super. And the whole idea of this My Super solution is to have everybody, all super funds, having to provide a low cost, low frills superannuation option that's going to ultimately, the idea is that it's ultimately going to provide a better long-term outcome for Australians. The challenge of it is that some of the ways that it's set up, and the discussion has been around, that it can be a little bit more of encouraging people to set and forget. Whereas the better scenario is that we actually engage with our superannuation, understand how it's working, understand how it can benefit us, and make decisions around it. So regardless of whether you're in a public offer fund or you're investing through a self-managed super fund, it's important to understand, how much money you've got, what it's invested in, what other benefits it can provide me, like insurance, for example. Your superannuation is a cost-effective way to pay for your insurance without affecting your everyday cash flow. So definitely, regardless of whether you're a self-managed super fund or you're just going through the public offer track, increasing your engagement with your superannuation is important.
Some people, Gavin, are very financially literate and have their mind around all of the changes and developments when it comes to finance and with their own superannuation. But for the typical family, I would suspect that most people are on a sort of a set and forget idea, a routine where you really don't engage much with your super. For a particular family situation, what would you say would be a regular time limit for actually getting out the books or the statements and going through and making decisions about your super?
Yeah, good question. It depends on where you are in the life cycle. If you're nearing retirement, if you're 50 plus, it's something that I would potentially review at least annually, particularly with the strategies that are available to you. If you're in your 30s or 40s, I would suggest that as long as you have your strategy set, as in your investment strategy set, and sufficient insurances in place, and knowing that they're going to be maintained, then looking at it annually and potentially doing a biannual or every third year more detailed review would be sufficient. So, at least annually, but for the younger person, you could probably, defer a detailed review for a couple of years.
Now, should you do that review with your superannuation representative, if it's from a super fund, there's someone managing your particular portfolio, how do you do that? Do you actually invite them a visit, or do you go and sit in their office? What's the best way to do that? Yeah,
increasingly, superannuation funds are providing advice, and they're providing that advice in a couple of different formats. One is that you can ring up and have a general discussion over the phone, and it's just general discussion. They're not going to recommend you do anything, but you can ask a range of questions. They also might provide a service which is what we call intra-fund advice. So they might provide you some written advice about some limited issues. So it might be which investment option you're in, what insurances you should have, and how much you're contributing to your super. So that's another option. Those two options are generally free, so good to utilise if your fund actually does them. Another option is you might want more comprehensive advice, as in you might want to take into account all your details, all your investments, not just superannuation. That's when we're talking about specific personal advice, and generally that's when you need to pay for it. You can go through your fund to access that information or to access that type of service, and sometimes they provide it at good prices. But you also can go to an independent advisor and get that type of advice as well. But at least going to your superannuation fund to seeing what services they could provide is a good low-cost opt to start with.
And just quickly, if your super has been returning zero returns or below, what sort of outlook ought we be looking forward to for a turnaround and for a rise in the growth of our super fund?
Oh, very good question, Neil. And we can't predict the future, but depending on what happens around the world, ideally we'd have some, more positive returns over the next 12 months. I'm not predicting that by any means, but barring some significant catastrophes in Europe and around the world, hopefully we are in positive territory for the general balance fund. But there are so many issues around the economy. The debt levels of nations are just astounding. So there are lots of challenges out there, but those with the longer term view, I think, can be certain that there'll be positive returns again over the not too distant future.
And when it comes to this particular issue, the information we've been talking about doesn't take into account the personal objectives, financial situation, or the needs of individuals, and you should consider the appropriateness of the information having regard to your own objectives, financial situation and needs, and obtain professional financial advice prior to making any decisions. Gavin Martin is the Managing Director and Financial Advisor at Cornerstone Wealth. There's a link to Gavin's site on the 2020 page at vision.org.au. Gavin, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for being with us today on 2020.
Thank you, Neil. Great to be with you.